Hello, Brian Ballard again. Ballard, how are you doing?
Pretty good, Scott. Good to see you, man. How you
Yeah,
doing?
man. Good to see you. Good to see you, brother. Hopefully, we have enough, more participants like we did last, Sunday, and other people. You're free to call in. I'm going to go ahead and post this link right here in the live chat. That way, if you guys want to participate, like call in, you can. Just like we had someone call in last week. So if you like the conversation and want to participate, feel free. All I can say is be respectful. You will be booted if you're not respectful. Um, but so far, it's been really good. So, anyways, yeah, we were going to talk a little bit about, or maybe a lot about morality and is it subjective? Is it objective? What's your view, Brian? What do you think morality is? Is it objective, subjective? What's your thoughts?
That's such a tough question, really. Um, I'd have to say, technically, if you want to be philosophical about it, it's subjective.
Hmm.
But I mean, I guess my idea on it is morality only applies to sentient beings, to humans. It only applies to our mind. So in that sense, it has to be subjective. I don't
Hmm.
ascribe to some platonic morality. Of course, I don't subscribe to the command theory,
Hmm.
definitely. And I don't, I like a T jump, and but his objective morality is, morality is a property of the universe, just like the laws of physics. And
Hmm.
I just can't buy that. Um, the universe was here for billions of years without people around, and
Hmm.
where was morality then?
Right.
To me, and
Right.
of course, being a naturalist, morality is an evolved trait that
Hmm.
helps social animals survive and thrive, and it's that
Right.
simple. So,
Right.
it, is that subjective or objective? That's a tough question for me.
Yeah, it's kind of for me. You may argue that it's a little bit of both in a way. Like the goals are subjective. Like we can say, well, my form of morality says, for example, um, some people think you should outlaw, homosexuality, or we think you should women should have a certain spot in society, or all these things that other people might disagree with, but that's their goal. Their goal is to achieve that, you know second class citizenship for women, death for gay people. For them, that's totally moral. And for the civilized part of society, I would think, in my opinion, it's wrong. It's not right. But that's just my subjective view on it, right? Just like their subjective view is that it's right to do those things. I see those things as wrong in my opinion. But if my goal is to increase, well-being or something like that, then then we can talk about objective ways to get there. Like there's better ways to get to well-being than other ways, you might argue. So it seems to be a little bit of both. But I think the way T Jump describes it, like there's some unknown particle that may be like a moral particle, like a particle that um, you know is objectively there. But to me, if you look at particles can become entangled.
Right.
Particles can be in superposition. Is that the same for morality? Can morality become in can morality do those things like subatomic particles can? Particles are kind of like descriptions of fields. So he's saying that morality may be like a field. There might be a field of morality, kind of like maybe Hindus say about karma, like there's this karmic field. But are we saying then that they can become entangled? They can do superposition. They can do everything that we understand about particles? I don't think so. That would kind of go against, you know, that, that absolute moral thing that he's, fighting for. Like it's always wrong to, impede on somebody's free will or choice or whatever, right?
Right.
And, and some argue that, without free will, you can't have morality. We know that free will, some people feel like free will is a myth, that it's an illusion. So are we saying that morality is like an illusion? Well, if that was true, then it could be, you know.
Right.
So I don't know. I don't see. I don't understand how to argue for it. But a lot of philosophers, do believe in objective morality, and I just don't
Yeah, this is
quite
true.
understand how.
Yeah. I mean, the one way I like to kind of approach it is to ask the question, what is the purpose of morality? You know,
Right.
why are we even talking about it? What is its function? And when you start getting to that, okay, well, it's to, tell what is right from wrong. Well, what's that objective standard, right and wrong? And
Hmm.
you're always going to have to come down to well-being, no matter what. Even
Hmm.
even even the Christians, they say, well, God says this is moral. Well, why should I care what God says?
Right.
Well, if you don't do what he says, you're going to burn in hell. Well, so I'm looking after my well-being,
Right.
right? So whatever, however you come down to that.
Yeah, and you think about what is the meaning of objective. Objective means out is the opposite of subjective, so it means it's outside of a mind. Well, does God have a mind?
Exactly.
If He's making moral proclamations, then even God's morality is subjective, unless God derives His opinions from something outside of Himself. You know, which then He would be kind of determined by other things outside of His own mind, which wouldn't make a whole lot of sense when you think about how they define God, or most people define God, anyways.
Right. It's that old question, is it right because God says so, or does God say it's right because it is right? Is
Yeah,
there some objective standard outside of God? You know,
right.
I think a lot of theists, especially Christians, would say, well, it's not subjective because God is perfect. Well, what is perfect? That's just
Hmm.
another subjective thing there.
Yeah,
So no matter what you come back to, if it's a mind, it's subjective.
that's right. That is so correct. And
No.
it's just a definitional thing. By definition, then God, morality would be subjective if it's grounded in the mind of God. And the way I argue it as a naturalist, and pantheism, just in the relation of a God conversation, you could say, just as a good refutation, that without the nature of morality, there's no grounding for anything like right and wrong. So if, let's say, I grant that morality was objective, outside of mind, right? Then one could argue that morality, like T Jump says, is grounded in the nature of reality. And in a way, it kind of is, because, like you said earlier, we evolve. It's an evolved trait. It's an evolved characteristic of humanity and other, maybe even other lower animals to some extent. So morality seems to evolve or emerge out of, the chaos of the universe at a lower level to a higher level, and maybe a little top down, maybe, but still, it seems like I could argue that, but it wouldn't require a God necessarily, like a supernatural, mindful God. In fact, it
Exactly.
would make more sense to say morality is objective on pantheism, you know, just as an
Right.
argument. So it
Yeah.
kind of refutes that whole thing.
Right. That would even make more sense actually than total theism.
Right.
But I think that's where you get, where they say the question is difficult, because
Hmm.
you can say, yeah, it's subjective, and you can say, okay, well, as a naturalist, I've just decided that morality, is based on the well-being of sentient beings,
Hmm.
and yeah, that is subjective. But what is the alternative?
Right.
What else would it be? If it's not God and whatever He wants, why are we even talking about morality?
Hmm.
The reason we're talking about it is because we're social beings that live in social groups, and without morality, we're not going to make it.
That's right.
You know,
Survival,
yeah,
our species survival depends on our cooperation and how we can actually um, increase the well-being of our tribe, first of all, family, first of all,
mhm,
tribe, and it grows and grows as we become more advanced. As T jumps, maybe argument would be, morality is there, and the evidence to support an objective form of morality is the fact that societies get ever closer to a more perfect sort of ethic. We're getting good at it. We're getting better at it. In other words, slavery was the norm for thousands and thousands of years. Now that we've become more technologically advanced, we don't need slavery. We don't need human suffering in order to get stuff done. We actually have better technology. So that kind of empowers us to think more deeply about things like well-being and how can we increase that, maximize it given our current technological situation. So where there's no technology, it becomes you're very dependent on a lot of things that we may consider immoral by today's standards. So someone like T Jump would argue, well, this kind of is evidence towards an objective morality because we have evidence of. But my whole thing is, well, that's sort of like an argument for presentism. Like it's
right.
as though we're saying that the present moment is the most moral we can be. But then 100 years from now, they may look at what we're doing today as totally immoral, just as we look at 100 years before us. So it's always changing. And this sort of goes towards a more subjective, relative sort of morality, wherein, morality really depends on, human mind, what humans' opinions are at the time and collectively. Um, doesn't necessarily, it seems better because it's always seems better.
Right.
you know, we're like fish in water. We
Yeah.
don't, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I can see that, but I don't think that we're like discovering some objective morality,
Hmm.
but we're using our rational minds, and I don't even know if it's so much technology. I mean, we ended slavery, what, over 100 years ago,
Hmm.
and we didn't have technology, but it was more learning to reason,
Right.
and learning to be rational, not depending on some religion for to dictate what is rational and moral to us. And
Hmm.
I think that really a lot of, the Enlightenment started a lot of that off, and just to say, what kind of moral standing do I have? I can't remember who said it, but you have to accept a moral system that you are willing to live under.
Hmm.
It's like if I look at slavery and I think, well, if I was a slave, I wouldn't, I wouldn't think slavery was right.
Hmm.
So if you can get to the point where you have some empathy, and you first, I guess, recognize that all humans are equal,
Hmm.
you can rationalize that out. I can say objectively, moral and slavery is immoral objectively,
Yes.
under the subjective idea that human beings have inherent worth.
Yeah. If the goal is that, like if the goal is to maximize well-being and focus in on the self-worth of others, then we can objectively say slavery is wrong, because it doesn't foster that goal, you know. And that goal, is subjective though, because as we see in different
Definitely.
cultures have different goals for their societies. Um, so it's really hard to pinpoint. It's really hard to say. It really is a tricky one because I mean I don't know if you've done much reading about the topic from like philosophy, like Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or whatever. They go through all the different arguments for objective, and a lot of Christian.
Realism, anti-realism. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
On
yeah.
and on and
And
on.
it's like you know people don't understand, and this is the whole thing. It's like people think religion. You would have to be religious to support objective morality. Like that's the only way to get it. And what people don't really understand, especially Christians and Muslims, is that there's multiple ways to get there. It doesn't depend on your supernatural God. You can have objective morality on different reasons, and you can go through philosophy and check it out. But for me, it's so much easier. It seemed more intuitive to me that it's subjective.
Exactly. I mean, that's I've been through a lot of that, and it's been a long time since I've been, considered all that esoteric philosophy stuff because
Hmm.
in the end, it really doesn't seem to amount to a hill of beans.
Right,
Really. You know, so morality is subjective. So what? You know,
right.
so what? And I would say a couple, a naturalistic morality, you could say it's subjective, but it's really the only game in town. I
Hmm.
mean, what else are we going to talk about other than the well-being of humans? You know,
Right.
if the theist wants to talk about pleasing their god or whatever, that's even more subjective. I
Yeah.
mean, you have to subjectively choose which god is real. There's no objective choice to that. I mean, that's
Hmm.
obvious. Nobody agrees on what God is, so that's subjective. Then, if you choose that God subjectively, then you have to subjectively decide what he really wants or not, because the people that worship the same God can't even agree on what he wants or what he considers moral or immoral. And
Right.
then you're even to the question, well, so what if God says it's moral or not? That's still subjective. So you've got layers and layers of subjectivity there. And in all of that, you're not really making any moral progress.
Right. Right. And people still disagree even on the progress part side of it. You know, there's people that want, I think, essentially maybe on the same side, but simply talk past each other because of different ideological differences or philosophical differences on, you know, what a thing is. Like, I think most people are against pedophilia, and then some people will say, well, because I'm against pedophilia, I'm also against, you know, um, inclusiveness. You know what I mean? And then some people may argue that, well, you know, I think that inclusiveness is harmful for kids, because they have this misconception, or and vice versa. They're kind of talking past each other, and unfortunately, it's become politicized, and so
Well,
like you could say, conservatives and liberals alike will sort of capitalize on those topics in order to create this division, and they kind of like a if you have different ways of thinking about how to handle something like pedophilia or something like that, you know, maybe if you don't agree with a method, then you're labeled as a bigot, or then you'll be labeled as a pedo. Um, you're pro pedophilia because you don't agree with the way they want to address the issue, you know. And so
right.
this is sort of like a distraction from the common core morality here, which is we don't want harm for kids. I think we all agree on that. But the methods divide people, and I think they're divided because people are talking past each other. Why? Because we're all in an echo chamber. Everybody's hearing, you know, this is how you address it. And if you don't agree, then you support pedophilia. or you're a bigot if you don't go about it this way,
Right.
And I think this is why we should have open discussion, and we should check things out like critical thinking, epistemology, and understand that politicians and media can oftentimes reason fallaciously to push a narrative. And because people aren't trained
Yeah.
in critical thinking and they're not trained in epistemology and sound epistemology, they don't know how to tell the difference between, truth and, bullshit, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's a real problem, especially in this society. But I think even, if you get to the point where at least you can agree, morality, is based on improving society, improving the lives of individuals.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean that you have the answers, though. You can still disagree on what that is. Like, the question of, what should kids learn and how early or how late. There's definitely room for disagreement and discussion. But I think if people could stay rational and think clearly, that, you can find an objective answer to that.
Yeah.
And but you're right, in this country especially, that's sorely lacking.
Yeah.
People have gone off into their different corners, demonized the people that of different political straits, and there's not really much rational discussion on any subject, really.
Yeah. And,
It's a sad state.
I'm sort of, like as far as my views about just about everything is I'm very agnostic and I'm kind of middle of the road because I don't like to be all in on things because I like to keep my mind open and I like to take in information and not let my own bias get in the way. So I really work hard at least to mitigate as much bias as I can in my opinions. And I try to anchor myself in well-being. Like I'm an empathetic person. I try to be, and but you know, when you talk to people, some people just all they know how to do is parrot what they're
Yep.
told,
Yep.
and so it's hard to really talk to people meaningfully. And that's why I kind of shy away from certain issues. Like I think it's a lot easier to talk for me, anyways. I don't know why, but it seems to be a lot easier to talk about religion and philosophy, epistemology, mainly skepticism. I like to go to the root rather than attack the little issues. For me, it's like it seems like my whole thing is I like to arm ourselves with the right tool set. First, let's get the tool set right. I think if we all get the right tool set and know how to use the tools effectively, if we can all agree seems to be the best way to use epistemology, then we can sort of sort these things out a lot better than when we start thinking fallaciously and we start ad homing each other and we start misrepresenting the issue and conflating and making all these logical errors. Like that goes nowhere. All you're really doing is you're putting fuel to the fire, you know. And so I kind of center on that in my discussion points, but and sometimes this can
Yep.
be done just by asking questions. And what I've kind of noticed is that, like what I like to do is take the opposing view just to challenge even my own beliefs, like try
Definitely.
to steel man the other side as much as possible. And I noticed that a lot of people on both sides of the spectrum, if you just ask questions, sometimes more than not, you can talk with them better than if you just call them names and mislabel them. Oh, you're just a bigot. If you think that, that doesn't really help move the conversation.
It really doesn't, and I've really tried to practice on the street epistemology. I think that's really a valuable tool, and
Hmm.
for both sides. And I've seen some theists that really can use it well also.
Hmm.
But that idea of just asking questions, and listening to that other side, and I'll have to admit that's difficult for me. You
Yeah.
know, in some ways I'm pretty opinionated,
Yeah.
and that's a
Yeah.
real weakness. That's a weakness of mine.
Right. Right.
which I've got to try to face that also. But it
Yeah.
really, I mean, there's nothing comes of that, of just trying to push my opinion on somebody. What's that going to do? Nothing,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
But to listen to them, to ask what is your reasoning? Why did you come to that conclusion? How is your thinking? And maybe find out, well, what is my thinking going on also?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah,
that's
because
that's difficult,
I like to say I'm probably wrong about most things. Like I'm pretty sure I am.
right?
And just knowing that is enough to humble me down enough to not really try to argue too hard for things, and I become a very non-confrontational person in the process. And try to just be cool, try to keep, even in my debates, like I was having a debate with one guy a while ago, and he said, "Well, you seem to be you're straw manning me," and I was like, "I apologize. The last thing I want to do is straw man you, because then it wouldn't really help make up my point. And so I really need to just re-ask you, what are you trying to say?" So I apologize. I said that, and people in the comment section were like, "Wow, what a surprise! For once, somebody didn't get called a straw man and lose their fucking mind."
Right?
It's like, because really, what's the sense? Like, I mean, I kind of felt it. I'm not gonna lie to you. I kind of felt, you know, kind of jabbed a little bit that way. I kind of knew what the whole deal was there, but I wanted to give them benefit of the doubt,
Right?
and just be more about asking questions
Right?
rather than, because I want to be charitable. Like, I want the best argument you have. I want to address that, not make up your weakest argument for you and then attack a straw man. Like, that's
Exactly.
not going to help me, and it's not going to help the audience or anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's one thing I used to be really good at, more instead of just attacking somebody, asking, why do you believe that?
Right.
You know, what is your thinking here? And I think maybe I've just been online a little too long,
Yeah.
you know, and maybe it's affected me.
It
Maybe I'm getting a
can,
little,
man.
getting a
Hmm.
little jaded, a little frustrated, maybe.
Yep.
Because that's the kind of things I used to try to do more instead of, because you see it all the time. Like I said, somebody will say something and then everybody will just jump on it.
Right.
You're an idiot, you're wrong, blah blah. Instead of saying, well, why did you come to that conclusion? What's your thought process here?
Right.
You know,
Right.
which can really lead to a productive conversation.
Right. And
But
sometimes mirror what somebody's
right,
saying, kind of, let me get this right.
right,
I just want to interject just so I understand what you're saying so far, and just reiterate. But a lot of people, it seems like they're more into winning the conversation, whatever that means, rather than actually understanding and moving the conversation forward. That's why, it's not good to label people, "Oh, well, you're arguing for this." Like, no, if I didn't say that, then you shouldn't assume that's what I'm doing. You should ask me, rather than just, build something up so you can attack that thing. That's so weak.
right. Yep.
It's a weak method. And I've had that. But guys, if you're out there in the audience and you want to
Yeah.
contribute, feel free. I've got the StreamYard link up in the live chat. So if you want to click on that, join the conversation. We'd love to. Now, I have to warn you, I have to do something with my son here in about 45 minutes. So I'm going to not go on for 2 hours like we did last time. So,
That's that's probably a good idea. We just were having a good time last time. Time
yeah,
got away for sure. So yeah, 45 minutes ought to be a good cutoff.
that's right. That's right.
But yeah, y'all call in. Let's
Well,
talk
let's
about
hear it,
something.
man. Talk about it. We're not here to bite your head off. And, this is an open forum. I don't like, when I made this channel, I didn't want it to be an echo chamber, like me and Brian, we could probably disagree on some things and we probably agree on a lot of things. And that's why I picked, I really wanted to work with Brian on my channel, because he's someone we have enough in common. And I know his demeanor is sort of like mine, very laid back, very open, and so we get along very well. But we're not an echo chamber, so feel free to come in with an opposing view. We won't get angry because you're not on the format with us. Challenge us. I like to be challenged, and I like to challenge back because I like to be stimulated and I like to grow intellectually.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we're not going to, we don't want to just jump on somebody or, like you said, try to win. We
Right,
just want to have a good conversation.
right, and I think we both agree that we kind of both lean towards morality being subjective. Um, so if you've got a different view, let us know. Because for me, I'm defining objective as that which exists outside of of a mind. Period. So gravity. If assuming science and assuming that there is an external world, an objective world out there, which I think most people do, at least in our actions, we do. I don't think it's too much of a stretch. So I always, Brian, I tend to always try to be very concise with my language because I
That's
think, like you, I've been kind of jaded by online discussions because so many people will try to hone you in on your, how you're using stuff, and it's really it gets in the way. So I just like to be very clear. I would say that there's an objective world out there. I think we all agree on that. And without humans, there is no, murder is wrong because there's no murder to be done, right?
exactly.
So,
That's,
yeah,
I just can't, I don't buy that, um, platonic existence or, like T jumps, undiscovered physical property. It's all subjective. If there wasn't minds, there wouldn't be morality. It just
right.
seems pretty obvious. But then, of course, the theists, then they want to run with that. And then
Mhm.
they'll go from subjective to arbitrary
Right.
right away. Okay. Well, if it's subjective, then you can't say the Nazis were wrong. You
Right.
know, well, subjective doesn't mean arbitrary.
Hmm.
We've got a subjective standard, and so we're going to objectively go by that. It's
Right.
almost like like uh, when you play chess, the rules are objective, right? There's no subjectivity there. The rules are set, and that's the way they are.
Hmm.
Now, to play chess is a subjective decision.
Hmm.
And once you've made that decision to play chess, well, then you've got objective rules to follow. And where the analogy kind of breaks down is there's no other game in town than survival, thriving. You know, we don't have a choice not to play the game.
Right.
We're born into this world and we're playing whether we want to or not.
Right.
And if we can discover those objective rules to facilitate that, then things would progress.
Hmm. And some people feel like morality is absolute too. Like some people say, well, it's absolutely wrong to steal. It's absolutely wrong to kill. It's absolutely wrong. But when pressed, you quickly learn, you from the trolley problem, that whole thought experiment kind of shows and demonstrates that that can't be right either. Because what
Well,
if I stole the plans from the Taliban that they had for killing 1 million people with a bomb or something?
right.
Suppose I was able to stop that, prevent that by stealing something from them. Would that be wrong morally?
Right.
Now, T Jump would say, yeah, it's still wrong.
Yeah. See, that's what I can't. I just can't buy that, man. I just can't buy it.
Yeah, I just can't wrap my mind around that. It's like it's there. We live in a world of relations,
Exactly.
and just
But
denying, yeah, it doesn't make sense.
there again, there's that subjectivity. There's some morals are relative to the situation,
Hmm.
um, but you still got that same grounding. If okay, so stealing's wrong, but if I steal those plans from the Taliban, I'm going to save all these people. Okay, you can say that's relative. You can say it's subjective all you want, you know, but you know, you've got to see that that's a morally correct situation. It's not arbitrary. It just didn't decide, well, I'm going to do it for the heck of it. There's a purpose behind it. And
Yeah.
that purpose always comes back to the same thing of well-being. Always, anytime you come to it. And then, the Christians especially, they're like, morals are objective, and then they'll talk about the 10 commandments.
Hmm.
Well, the only real objective morals in there or do not lie, do not steal, do not cheat, you know, don't bear false witness. And those are the things that every society has to adhere by to be successful.
Hmm.
We don't have to worry about not worshiping other gods, not making graven images, not keeping the Sabbath holy. Those are totally subjective and don't
Hmm.
really, but when the only quote objective morality that you can find or moral directives are the ones that promote society and well-being of humans.
Yeah.
You
See,
know,
that's where the philosophers come in with their version of naturalistic sort of objective moralities. They'll say, well, we have this thing called empathy and love, and it seems like the more we focus on that, or the more we exercise that, it seems like we can measure societies improving and people's well-being improving because of that. um, all the other laws aside, they get mixed in. Like it's just a matter of, they'll say, well, like you mentioned, the Sabbath, all of these different things, what foods to eat, wool, don't wear woolen cloth. Um, those things are just confused into it. They're not morals. They're more like something else. They're just arbitrary religious, edicts. Whereas that's getting mixed up with true morality, which is, treat your neighbor as you'd like to treat yourself, the golden rule stuff, which is found in all religions across the world. That commonality of the golden rule would show like this objective thing that's kind of rooted in really the nature of reality, which we're calling nature. In other words, nature seems to, it seems to be all about surviving, and the drive is for procreation and the, expansion of a species. And so love and charity and the golden rule, these things sort of foster that natural tendency for us to want to live and survive and pass our genes on. Um, so in that way, they say morality is objective. Now, some people would disagree, and some people will say, well, what about these societies that, are like death cults, and they promote death and they promote destruction in the name of morality and stuff like that? And they said, well, that's kind of like people who deny gravity, or like T Jump will say, like they're just wrong. Like,
yeah,
doesn't mean that the objective morality doesn't exist. It just means that some people are wrong. What do you think
exactly.
about that?
Yeah, exactly. We talk about the Islamic world, man. You keep half of the population subjected, you know, um, with no rights, keep them covered up and, covered from head to toe. That's objectively wrong. That
Hmm.
is objectively wrong. You're subjugating half the population. That's just objectively wrong. Your
Yeah,
religious crap doesn't mean squat.
right.
If you could show me how that makes society better, and if you could show me that your society is better, and you could show me that women are flourishing more, okay, then maybe we could have a conversation. But that's not the case. It's obviously not the case.
Right. Like, think of Dan Dennett or Oppie Graham, or Graham Oppie, um, famous atheist philosopher, believes in objective morality, right? And so his argument is like, I can't really prove that killing babies for fun is wrong. I can't prove that objectively, but something I think inside of the core of people, just inside their very core, is just wrong. It's just bad. It's just, we know it instinctively, intuitively. It's not something that we have to really deliberate on. It's, it's different than Sabbath laws. It's like something like that is just totally, and for those reasons, he'll say this is a demonstration of objective morality that really exists in nature like that.
Right.
And
I mean,
kind of understand that in the sense that we've evolved and we
exactly.
have this strong genetic urge to do that. That's just an objective fact, right?
Yep.
Like it's a
Exactly.
norm. So it's an objective norm. No getting around that. So maybe in that sense it is, but still, I don't know. It seems like you have to have a mind in order to, you know, act on it or feel these things. You have to have the capacity to feel. So I think it's kind of emergent, at the same time. So it's a little bit of both, I think. I don't know.
You
I
know,
don't know.
yeah, I think that's the problem is like if you want to talk philosophically, if I say that, morality is based on the well-being of sentient beings, okay, maybe that is subjective, right?
Hmm.
Why should I care about sentient beings? But on the other hand, what else is there?
Hmm.
If that's not what we're talking about, then what is the purpose of morality? Okay,
Right.
if we're not talking about helping human beings to thrive and survive, then what the hell? We don't
Right.
need morality.
Right.
We certainly don't need any dictates from somebody's God. So if
Right.
I've
See,
if I've
that's the
abandoned
thing.
that, what else is there?
Yeah. See. I mean, so at default, my default is that it doesn't really matter because I feel the
Yeah,
way I feel anyways. Whether you want to call it objective or subjective, it doesn't matter because I'm still not going to kill babies for fun anyways. I still think that's bad, regardless of whether it's objective or subjective. So that part for me is really just a philosophical. It's sort of like a mental masturbation sort of thing. Um, but if you really serious, if you really want to have a serious discussion, and someone like a Christian or something came in and said, "Well, it's actually objective," you kind of have no, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot type of argument, then I would say you're definitely wrong. If you're appealing to God for the root of objective, you're definitely wrong because you're defining God as this mental mind, you know, and if it's
um,
grounded in mind, whether it's mine or God's, it doesn't matter. Then it's subjective, by
exactly.
definition. So you it's like you said, there's more sense on naturalism to have if you were to argue for objective morality. I think you're going to have better luck with that, connecting those dots under naturalism.
Yeah,
So it doesn't matter. So if someone if usually what I do, like if a Zoroastrian or a Christian comes to me and says, well, you have no morals. Well, number one, it doesn't matter because I agree with basically the same morals you do in our society. We all in the same society. I don't break the law. You don't break the law. So what difference does it make? But beyond that, you know, I can argue naturalism is still a better argument for objective morality. Let's grant you that. Let's grant you that it's objective. Okay. Well, under my worldview, I have more grounding than you do. You're grounding on your imagination, this conceptual idea of a God who has a conceptual idea about
right,
what's right and wrong. So you're just subjective two times over
right.
already
It's layers of
of
subjectivity.
subjectivity, right?
It's
Where I'm just
you know
going to the grounding of reality. Like you don't get
right,
any more bottom than that, right?
exactly. But I think in some ways, for a lot of theists, I think for a lot of theists, it's a lazy position.
Hmm.
And I think we talked before. A lot of those type of people want somebody to tell them what's right and what's wrong. What to do and what not to do, and The preacher says that the Bible says that this is what God says, so that's what I'm going with.
Yeah. It's actually
Yeah.
more, it's layers of subjectivity. Like you said, I
Right.
didn't think about that.
Right.
The
Yeah.
interpretation of the Bible.
Yeah. Well,
Even interpreting your Bible is subjective because you have
I
to
mean,
decide whether, you're still deciding whether
right.
you want this as your authority. It's like we're always the final authority in our mind because even if you wanted the Bible to be the objective standard, you had to subjectively choose that over something else. Like I chose it over the Quran, or I chose it over Zoroastrian, or whatever. Like that's the first thing. And then you have to choose which interpretation of the Bible do I want to go with. So you have to choose that subjectively.
Right.
And then everything else we mentioned. So it's
Right.
like you said, it's layers and layers of subjectivity.
Are you a Southern Baptist? Are you Catholic? Are you a Mennonite? You know,
Yeah,
every is smoking cigarettes a sin? Is drinking
right.
alcohol in moderation a sin?
Mm-hmm.
Is looking at a woman with lust in your heart a sin?
Mm-hmm.
You know, they all have their own. It's all subjective.
Yeah.
You know,
That's that's what I really try to impress upon, with theists is that if they go that way, that, you're kind of self contradicting yourself. When you say your morality is objective because those layers just exist. I mean, it's so obvious. And I think they never really take the time to think about it.
right?
And they just fight mainly, they dig their heels in to just maintain their faith, you know. And again, guys, if you want to, if we're saying something wrong,
Yep.
let me know, man. Come on in and maybe clear it up because I'm just basing what I'm saying on my experience with conversations with theists. Maybe you have a different take on it, or maybe I'm missing something. So please give us some, give us a clue, man. Throw us a bone.
Right. Tell us where we're wrong. I'm glad to listen.
Heck yeah,
Yeah.
man. Heck yeah. But yeah, I tell you, and then the other issue that comes into it is the idea of free will. And people say, well, if you don't have free will, you can't have morality because it becomes arbitrary. And that's not morality. But how do you address that? Have you ever had that conversation of,
I've had I've had that conversation a million times, and I try to have that conversation with the. So my basic standing is the only type of free will we can really talk about is compatibilism.
hmm
That is the only free will that could possibly exist. The
hmm
idea of libertarian or contra-causal free will is nonsense. It's
hmm
just completely nonsense. And I've studied some deep philosophy on that, and it's all bullshit.
yep,
Right? Right? It's just bullshit. There's no, if you believe that everything, Christians, everything that came to exist has a cause. Everything has a cause. Okay, well, if everything has a cause, then everything's determined.
that's right.
And the only option, the only thing, if it's not determined, it can only be random,
hmm
and
And
that's
that's
not
not
free
free
will.
will.
There's no third option. They keep thinking there is, and somehow God is going to get you out of that, or having a soul somehow is going to change that equation, and there's no way. And it
Right.
it can be a little disturbing when you first think about it, but it shouldn't be. I mean, just because everything is determined, my decisions are determined by my past, by my
hmm
genetics, by my experiences, and but what else could it be? What
Right.
I mean, that is what makes me me. Okay, so I can't shape what I am,
hmm
but I am what I am, and I can make my own choices from what I am.
You have no choice but to make a choice. Even
Exactly.
if you tried to choose not to make a choice, that in itself is a choice.
That's a choice.
So it's and I've had debates with Victor Vargas, our buddy,
Yeah.
And we went over this, and he really thinks it's funny because I call myself a meat robot,
Right.
which is sort of like a way of saying that I'm kind of determined at bottom level. And I've heard different arguments.
Oh,
Like Michael Shermer's free won't. Um, Sam Harris's
oh
seems to
man.
be a hard determinist, but Daniel
Yeah.
Dennett's more of a compatibilist
Yep.
who would say, well, our menu is determined, but
Right.
you still get to choose among the menu.
Exactly.
And I think he's the one who says it's kind of like having horse um, blinders on. Like you can't see everything, but you can see where to run ahead of you. So you can choose to stop or go, but you can't choose, everything. So you're kind
Right.
of limited in your you know free will. So it's kind of like a compatible way with determinism. You're determined, but you kind of have a little free will there. And and I kind of understand that in a way. Like, what is it? What was the analogy? Well, Sam Harris has really good one, and I like this one. If you really have free will, it means you can control your thoughts, right? But have you ever tried to stop thinking? Like close your mind and go into meditation and stop your thinking? It's impossible.
Right.
Like thoughts are always going to shoot in your head, and meditation kind of shows you that. It kind of teaches you that teaching. What do they call it in Buddhism? Anatta. Anatta is
Right.
no self. Like things happen to you, not you don't make things happen. They happen to you. So when you close your eyes and meditate, try to do mindfulness, first thing you understand is how hard it is to stop thinking because it's impossible. No one can do it, you know. And that in itself is kind of like a demonstration to yourself that you have no free will. Or if you do, it's very limited.
Right. Yeah. I saw a talk, and he was talking to the audience, and what's the next thought that's going to pop into your head? You can't
Hmm.
choose that, right? You can't
Hmm.
will what the next thought's going to be, you know, which
Yeah.
which is which is kind of spooky. He goes a little bit far with that. Um,
Yeah. He has a
because,
very Buddhist sort of Zen like philosophy on that.
I as far as like compatibilism goes, I mean that's where you get that sliver of free will. It's like we're
Hmm.
rational. Okay, I can't. I didn't choose my physical makeup. I didn't
Hmm.
choose the circumstances I was born under. I didn't choose the things that happened to me in my life. Those are what makes me me. So you can say I'm determined, but on the other hand, I can think and I can
Hmm.
think rationally and so like people that are born in poverty in terrible situations that put themselves through school, become doctors,
Mm.
become successful people, whereas everybody else doesn't. That's that sliver of free will there. They could not determine who they were, but that ability to be rational is that, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, you're right. They I think Daniel Dennett, he kind of says like the more you expand out in time, the more free will becomes possible. Like if you were to just focus in, he says, if you just focus in on the molecules and the billiard balls that go on in your the neurons bumping into each other, yeah, then you see nothing but determinism. But as you expand out and you start giving people time to think and use their reason and rationality to kind of like create habits, they sort of create the habits. So like you decide because of
Right.
determined by information that appeal to you. Let's say somebody says you don't want to stay in this, there's a way out. Like you said, you can work your way out of this bad situation. Then over time you can kind of develop habits and discipline that get you out of that situation. And so in that way your free will, so to speak, sort of worked for you because you were reasonable and rational. You took that information in and you sort of leveraged it in a rational way to where it works for you. But that's not billiard balls. That's not neurons firing. That's happening over long period of time. It's kind of like a
Well,
collection of that.
yeah, I would say that was like billions of neurons doing trillions of calculations a second.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get to that level, and then we're talking about emergent properties, which
Yep.
theists want to deny,
Mm-hmm.
but exactly.
Mm-hmm. And I
But
think emergence is wonderful. I mean, I think that's very
ev-
it's very mysterious, because if you look in the history of emergence, it's kind of like, from what I read, I was really surprised. I thought that it was just normal science, but as I looked into it, that stuff used to be considered kind of pseudoscience. This idea of emergence.
right,
And for a long time, people kind of dismissed it until, I guess, what was it, the 80s or 90s, when they started doing like Bell's theorem and
right.
other things, and then emergence kind of took on, and then neuroscience started taking it on, and we're like, yeah, actually, it's kind of like the mind is an emergent property. It's kind of like morality and all the things out of your consciousness is sort of emergent. And because they used to think it was more like a category error, like H2O, like, creates wetness. Wetness emerges from, you know, the combination of molecules. Like, there's no wetness in the molecules themselves, but when you put them together, it's kind of like the fire triangle. You got oxygen, heat, and friction, all of this stuff, and it's sort of then fire emerges. But there's no property of fire in heat. There's no property of fire in oxygen. These things only come about when you put these guys together, and that in itself is a really strange sort of way to think about how the universe works. If you really think about it, it's kind of weird.
Well, I
Especially
mean,
when it comes to mental stuff. That's when it really gets weird.
right. I mean, then you start talking about quantum physics.
Hmm.
Everything's emerged from quantum fields.
Yeah,
If you get down to it, there is nothing but probability fields.
that's right.
And everything's built up. And you've got built subatomic particles. You're building atoms. Atoms don't have the same properties as molecules. Molecules don't have the same properties as elements. Elements don't have the same properties as combined um, physical things. I mean, so it's all emergent.
Yeah,
And why? I think the like you're talking about a categorical error is it's not. you know
right.
it's the same thing
Principle. Hmm.
that I think you're trying to make that or some people try to make that a
Hmm.
categorical error when it's
Yeah,
obviously not.
yeah.
And then of
It's
course we've got some people, especially theists, you're talking about like a meat puppet, and they're like, well, you can't say that you have free will because it's just the neurons firing, and what do they call that, fizz in the brain.
hmm
And it's like, okay, well then what else is there, what else could it be? you know
hmm
and then most of them want to say, well, it's a soul. Well, okay, well, how does that work? How was that
Yeah,
change? If we had a soul, how would that change the equation?
it
It
doesn't.
would just be another addition, another part to it.
You're just kicking the can.
Right.
You're
You
just you're replacing one medium for another. Like, if the brain is the
exactly.
medium for free will, and then that doesn't work, you say, well, the soul. Well, now you have to explain how that works. Now you have to explain, how does a soul get free will? Well, there's
Exactly.
God. Well, then how does that get free will? How does God have free will?
Right.
It's just kicking the can, and you can use the same argument to dispel all of these things. And I guess what it really amounts to is like a contradiction. It's like a square circle type of situation, just by definition. Now, if somehow they prove somehow that there is this thing called free will. I don't know how they would, but if they did, I'd be totally open to it. But so
Oh, it'd be
far,
great.
everything I've heard just is a big contradiction.
Yeah, I mean, it would be great, but it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
I mean, if if things aren't caused by a previous cause, then the only other option is randomness.
Yeah.
And that's just all there is. And until somebody could tell me how a soul can change that, you know, what the heck? But it's nice for theists. They can say, well, the soul's immaterial, and it's something else. You know,
Yeah.
they can just make up whatever they want, but
Yeah. It's
but
like
they still
what
can't really explain how that's supposed to work.
like Matt Dillahunty said,
Yeah,
it's like appealing to a mystery to explain a mystery.
mhm, exactly. It's exactly what it is.
Hmm.
And still, you can't have a concept of how that would change. I mean, okay, if I'm a product of my genes are kind of informing what I'm going to want or what, my actions and my past experiences, they're informing it. So that's making me, okay, we could say I'm determined. Okay, if I add a soul to that, what is the soul adding? It has to add something else determined. It has to determine something or else it's random.
That's right.
It's not like there's some third option.
Yeah.
Even if it's immaterial, okay, fine, and they'll talk about, well, it's your thoughts are like radio waves, your soul is, you know, uh,
Hmm.
projecting thoughts into your brain. Okay, fine. So how does that change the whole equation of free will?
Right.
It's still doing it. It's still a cause, and it was still caused by something else.
That's right.
You know,
Because they're the ones that argue for cause and effect with the first cause
right?
arguments.
Right?
As long as you're doing that, you're never going to get out of that chain. That's why they call it a causal chain. It's like one thing leads to another. And as long as you're in that chain, and they try to say, well, the human mind somehow is out of that chain. I just don't see how that's possible. And if it was, then it means that ultimately you could do things that you can't do, like stop thinking, for
Right.
example. Stop thinking. Well, they can't argue against that,
Right.
and but they, of course, they'll continue. It'll go on forever, apparently.
Well,
It's been going on
yeah,
for a thousand
maybe.
years.
Maybe we'll evolve out of it one day.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hope so. Well, dude, it's kind of running into that time. I have to
Yeah, I
get the
think so.
child. Yeah,
So, well, let me ask you a quick question.
yeah.
What are the rules with these groups about like promoting this kind of channel? Do these people frown on that, or
I
is it
don't know.
group to
I've
group?
been
Or
I've been blasting these. Every time I do a show, I'm a part of like 10 or 15 different debate groups, and I blast it out, and I haven't had a problem yet.
okay,
People pretty much are
I want to
receptive
try
to
to
that.
promote it more. And there was a few people even this week, in some of these groups were having a good discussion, and I'm thinking, what I need to do is like tell them, hey, come on the show.
Right.
So I think I'm going to try that more. Try not to get in trouble, but try to
Yeah,
promote
try
that
it.
a little bit
It
more.
doesn't hurt. And, I don't know what happened last week, but we got like, I think within the first day, we had like 150 viewers.
It seems like people watch this after the show. And with
Yes.
the next few days, all of a sudden we get a lot of views, which is good.
Hmm.
Appreciate people looking, but it sure would be nice to have some theists come on and have a good discussion.
Yeah, I think I need to blast these out maybe a little earlier too, because sometimes they
Mhm.
don't show up in their feeds until after the show's over.
Oh yeah,
I've
well,
noticed, and so they're like, "Oh wow!" So they go and look, and it's like too late; it's over.
tonight.
But they'll
So
be looking at the rerun. So I think if I blast it out maybe a day earlier, it'll give
I'm
people a
gonna try
chance.
the same. All right,
Yeah,
let's try to promote it. Get a few people in here and get some
yeah,
get some conversations going on.
absolutely, man. That would be
Sounds
so
good.
much fun. That's the whole point, man.
Sounds good. All right, Scott. Well, still had a good conversation with you. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, this is like our church meetings.
Right there you go. I never thought I'd go to church twice a week, but
That's
here
right,
we are.
man.
Here we are.
We talk more about the Bible than they do at church. All right.
All right, man. Well, have a good one. We'll talk to you Sunday then.
All right, you got it, my brother. We'll see you
All
then.
right. Have a
All
good one.
right. You
All
too.
right. Bye.